dang complicated, you know, man. It's like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like messed up.
All right, T.R. Hudson, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, man. Sorry, I was a little late coming, but glad to be here.
Look, audio issues, that's a part of the charm, or so I say. You know, right? Like, this is very much a hobbyist production. But anyway, so how have you been doing since the last time we spoke to you?
Oh, I've been doing well. I mean, I put out a new book, which we're here to talk about tonight. Founded a magazine, which I hope to show a little bit as well. And, life in general has been pretty great, I got to say. How about yourself?
I'm glad to hear it. I didn't realize that you'd been so involved in the founding of Double Down. So why don't you tell us about your magazine first, and then we can go into the book later.
Yeah, sure. So Double Dealer was a Louisiana-based literary magazine from the 1920s. They got their start because I think it was H.L. Mencken, actually, who said that nothing of quality really comes from the South. So these guys, started this magazine, publishing for the first time authors like Hart Crane, Faulkner, Hemingway, just to name a few. And it just so happened that the rights to that magazine fell to someone who's friendly to us, let's say, and we were able to use the rights to revive that magazine. Myself, Mr. J.L. Mackey, and Mr. P.C.M. Christ. So we've been running. This is our second issue that we put out. We put our first issue out on our Substack, where we also have kind of a shooting the shit podcast that we put out every once in a while whenever we're all free. And yeah, we've been trying to put out good literature and pay writers and artists to put out that good work.
So I should say before we go into this, the reason that I have Double Down burned into my brain is that's a classic Neil Breen production, and as a long-running Neil Breen fan, his self-directed work Double Down features prominently in my brain. But yeah, I was interested to see. I think that I was maybe in a group chat where part of that magazine was planned. So I had heard that it was being revived, but I'm glad you guys came into possession of that. That's a great trademark to have, and obviously I have high hopes for it. So I have the magazine first of all linked, Amazon link if you want to check it out. I haven't had a chance to peruse it, but it seems like obviously high quality people are involved, so I'm interested.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited, and I'm very lucky to work with the men that I've worked with thus far. We've had some really talented people on this second issue, technically issue 10, because we picked up the numbering from the old Double Dealer to have that connection with the past. But yeah, our good friend Paul Fahrenheit features in this one, as well as Brad Kelly from the Art of Darkness podcast. Caleb Caudle. I don't know if you've read The Neighbor, but
I haven't yet. No,
that's one of the best novels to come out of our sphere. About sort of the hollowing out of Middle America and the opioid epidemic. Highly recommend Caleb Caudle or Caudell. I've never actually heard the name said out loud, so if I'm butchering it, Caleb, I'm sorry. But yeah, I featured in both issues because why run a magazine if you can't put your work out there?
So there are people in chat asking if the magazine takes submissions. Does it?
Yes, we do. You can submit to doubledealerstaff@gmail.com.
Do you have to be American to submit, or do you accept international?
No, we'll accept international. I'm not handling the money right now, so it's easy for me to say that. But I'm sure we'll figure it out if somebody internationally submits, and we have to figure out how to pay you.
All right. So now on to the main topic of the night, which is your second book. So how can you describe in the broadest possible terms your second book?
My second book is loosely based around the life of Joseph P. Kennedy, and the Kennedy dynasty. It's the story of 20th century America through the eyes of one of its most prominent families in terms of its rise and fall. And I think it really tells the story of this sort of post-war America that we kind of find ourselves in.
Yeah, that illusion was something that I picked up on, right? And just due to my own kind of ignorance of American history, it took me a while to pick up on it. But once I became aware of it, it was I don't know, it was very apparent throughout it. So this isn't your first book, correct?
That's correct.
Your first novel, which I haven't read, it was Automaton, right?
That is correct. Yes, it was a science fiction piece. This is more historical fiction. Definitely a change in genre.
All right. So obviously that's a pretty significant change. So how do you feel like you kind of developed as a writer from your first to second work?
I've definitely grown in terms of confidence. The first book I was a nervous wreck putting out, and I didn't, and for that reason, I also didn't take my time. I was kind of like, oh, I'm just going to close my eyes and hit submit and hope people like it, which to be fair, people did like it. And I was very much on my own in that regards. And I kind of let the work speak for itself. This time around, because I've made a lot of friends on Twitter, because I've kind of established somewhat of a brand for writing that people can find legible, whether they think it's quality or not, that's up to them. I'm able to kind of lean on that reputation a little bit more coming out with this next book.
So what was the process like of writing The Perfect and the Wicked?
Well, honestly, I was coming up with the sequel to Automaton. I have about half of it written because it was originally supposed to be a much longer work that I decided to break up into a trilogy. And I got bored with it. I got kind of sick of it. And I felt a little pressure. I felt like my sophomore book was going to be a flop if it was going to be this book. So I've had the idea of writing about the Kennedys for a long time. And I thought, I'm going to put this down and just kind of play around with this new story for a little bit. And it turned out all right. I mean, I wrote the book in like 3-4 months, where the last book took like 2 years.
So do you think that part of that was that increase of confidence you felt with your sophomore book? This is something that you've done before that enabled you to kind of go through it more quickly?
Probably. I think I also devoted a lot more time to this one. The other project was very on and off for a while. Like I had a lot of time during the pandemic to write it, and I was insulated in a bubble here. I was kind of motivated by the other works that my friends were putting out to try and top them. Because I mean, everybody talks about Nutcracker, everybody talks about Zero HP Lovecraft's work, and here I am swimming in that pool with these guys, and I'm like, you know what? I want to try it and at least write something better than these guys. At least throw my hat into the race, so to speak. So there was definitely a motivation there that I didn't have when it was just kind of a fun passion project. Now this was my the word, not career, but this was kind of a vocation. This is me trying to elevate right-wing literature, if that makes sense.
Well, and there's also the fact that you make it to book number 2 says something, right? Obviously, there are any number of people who can write something once, but kind of as it sounds like you've done, growing and developing as a creator is something that's difficult and takes a lot of work. So I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that, being in a social circle in which others are creating is a very positive thing, right? And obviously you mentioned there's a little bit of, it sounds like, competition in that, which is healthy, but also just, being pushed by peers who are doing, good work to excel. So after having, and I read this book very quickly, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I found it very readable and it pulled me in. But I'm curious, if you could say kind of what are the core ideas expressed in this, the things that you wanted to kind of pull out through this narrative, what would you say are kind of the main themes of this work?
I would say the main theme is the pursuit of power by people who aren't suited to it. I think that one of the things now, and this is tricky because I come from Irish stock, so it's me kind of thumbing my nose at my own people in a way. But I do think that when you get a Catholic in the White House for the first time in 1960, that changes how the country is run, how the country is seen, and it starts this retreat of the WASPs and the people who founded the country. And I'm not certain that was necessarily a good thing.
One of the things that I found interesting in it is how ethnic the politics of it all is, in your book. I mean, obviously, it's sort of a core understanding of, our circles more generally, right, is kind of like the ethnic nature of especially American politics, although we could say politics more generally. And it's interesting that you bring up the kind of changing of the guard between the WASPs and the Ellis Islanders. And in this book, and I won't even necessarily say spoiler, because like you said, it is based on history, right? But as there's this great conversation, and multiple times throughout the book, I would kind of send you a screenshot or a line that I thought was interesting. And it was a conversation between our main character and kind of a stand-in cipher for FDR. And it's essentially this conversation where FDR just lets him have it. Like, says like, oh, you're just a tool, you're a pawn, you'll never amount to anything. There'll never be, kind of an Irish in the White House. And obviously, look, like I have no love for FDR. That's probably an understatement. But it was an interesting kind of moment, where you see the kind of transition from that to, within a few decades, the Riley presidency or the Kennedy presidency. So I'm curious how much of your own background, played into this, and how much of it was just an appreciation for the history. Like, do you see any part of yourself or your story in this, I guess?
Not really. I would say that it's mostly a fascination with the Kennedy family. I mean, it's just they're such an interesting bunch in the best ways and in the worst ways. I mean, the fact that two of their sons were assassinated. You have Joseph Kennedy Jr. who dies in a very weird way in World War II. He doesn't die in combat. He dies in a training mission. Flying an experiment, what is essentially a drone version of like a B-25 bomber. The Kennedy curse, as it's known, is it's intoxicating in a lot of ways. In terms of there's a lot of gold to mine there, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, definitely, and I think that there's something interesting, and obviously I've made no secret of the fact that my favorite book is All the King's Men, and there are parallels to those two stories, right? It's this essentially the story of a man destroyed by power, and in each of those, there's the idea of the difference between kind of new money, new power, and old money and old power, and obviously the Kennedys do sort of display that. Right, like on one hand, there's the glitz, there's the glamour, but on the other hand, right, it's like essentially like one step up from essentially like white trash trailer, like trailer park activity. This is something that you explore in the book. So you mentioned that one of the Kennedys died in the war, and I wasn't aware of that. Is that sort of a subject of controversy, or is it just a footnote?
I made it a subject of controversy. I'm pretty sure it's a footnote. I just thought it was. I thought it was interesting, and one of the things that I like about writing fiction, because I thought about making this into like a nonfiction book, like a sort of revisionist historical book on the Kennedys, and I'm not a historian. I suck at research, so it's easier for me to just make shit up. And while I think a lot of it is spiritually true, I definitely play fast and loose with a lot of the facts, which is fine. It's fiction.
So let's start at the beginning of this book, right? Our main character, John Riley, and I guess it isn't at the beginning. He goes by a different name. It's John O'Reilly, correct?
Yes.
Which actually is its own interesting, moment in the book. That moment at which he decides to change his name, but he starts out as essentially, like a low level kind of like, Irish. I think the term is shanty Irish, right?
Yes.
Very poor. Father is an alcoholic, and sort of rises through the criminal underworld. And so I'm curious, what were your thoughts with that part, the kind of opening of the book? What were you trying to accomplish with that?
I was trying to. Well, this all started because I literally, the prologue was a short story that I wrote, and I kind of shared with a few friends, and they're like, this should be a book, which is always gratifying to hear. And I don't know. Did you ever see that show Boardwalk Empire?
No, but I'm familiar.
Yeah, so I mean, I love that show. Even some of the characters from my last book, I based from the show Boardwalk Empire. Just that whole time in history, Prohibition in the 1920s and the rise of the mafia in America, whether it's Irish, Italian, Jewish mafia. It's all really astounding, because then you also have the rise of the FBI and their whole war. It's a very interesting, bloody time in the country's history, and it's also the culmination of the first ethnic groups in America trying to find their way in the country. I mean, the first Italian mayor of New York, I think he was elected in like the 30s, and the Italians had only been there since the late 1800s, So these are groups that came to America with no background in the way that a republic runs, more or less, and they have to figure out how to survive in a place that really doesn't want them.
Well, and that's an interesting aspect to the book, because there are two kind of camps of criminals in this, right? There's the Irish mob and the Italian mob, and obviously our hero comes up through the Irish mob, but is very much several times this character is both the beginning and kind of the last act of the novel is there's a set of Italian gangsters, and there's multiple points at which they're kind of, even though they see each other, they see themselves as kind of diametrically opposed. There's no love lost between them, but they are kind of united by that label of immigrant, right? Which is contrasted to kind of the WASP mainline culture of America.
Definitely. And I think the thing with John, one of his tragic flaws is that he's so busy chasing, respectability in WASP culture that he spurns what is potentially his biggest ally, in Canino, in the Italian mafia. It's kind of like it really is his tragic flaw that he's trying to climb the ranks of a society that doesn't see him as one of them. He's almost like, kind of a gorilla in a tuxedo to them.
And there are multiple moments of that, when kind of the respectability shifts, and it's made very clear that his respectability is very put on. He is, obviously he changes his name. He, fabricates, an education for himself. He fabricates a war record. Things that were kind of considered essential and part and parcel of, becoming a member of the upper class. And part of that, right, is that he places an astounding amount of pressure on his sons, because he views his sons as essentially a way to break in, right? That his sons can go to an Ivy League education, can jump through the hoops required to be kind of respectable members of society. And so that's a good portion of where the drama in the second half of the novel comes from, is our main character's relation to his sons. So how much of that relationship between him and his 3.5, we'll say, sons, how much of that is historical and how much of that is kind of your own addition?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It's clear to me that JFK did not really want to go into politics. He was very much the next man up because his older brother Joe died in the war. Joe Kennedy was supposed to be the first Kennedy president. He was supposed to be the first Irish Catholic in the White House. He was supposed to be the golden boy, right? And if you look into Joe Kennedy Jr.'s background and some of his political views, we might have had a very different Camelot, let's say. And I'll leave that up to the viewers to kind of decipher and look up for themselves. But yeah, and I think that JFK's, sort of easygoing party boy, fuckboy attitude that he had, he wasn't going to stop that just because he had to get into politics. And in fact, he was using his position in politics to pick up more women and to, have a good time. While, occasionally stopping the end of the world due to some missiles in Cuba. But yeah, I'm not Bobby Kennedy. That's a little bit different. Bobby Kennedy definitely felt more like an outsider in his family. He was actually kind of a black sheep a little bit. Ted Kennedy more so. You could talk to our friend Sandbatch about Ted Kennedy. He's a friggin' psychopath. I made his analogy in the book a lot more sympathetic than he is in real life. But that's because I'm not as good a writer as reality or God or whoever you want to kind of put that onto. There were a lot of decisions that happened in the Kennedy family that I couldn't make work, especially when it came to Rosemary Kennedy, the daughter.
Well, there's actually a part of this that reminds me of this story, this character of Barry Lyndon, right? And Barry Lyndon is obviously an Irishman who sort of connives his way into the halls of power. But the climax of Barry Lyndon, right, is a moment in which he essentially sort of loses his cool in front of everyone. Just starts basically like a backroom brawl. Completely falls from any type of social relevance. And to me, it's obviously not structured not quite in the same way in your novel, but there's a point at which kind of the Rosemary analogy becomes that for John, where she essentially becomes a problem he must get rid of, because she is essentially a fly in the ointment when it comes to being a member of WASP upper crust society. And so I thought that was an interesting moment in it. So do you want to talk about specifically the character of Rosemary Kennedy? And I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. I cannot remember her analogy in the book.
I mean, it's just Rosie Riley.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the name so much, I decided not to change it. But I mean, Rosemary Kennedy, the real life person, that's just a heartbreaking, tragic story of what people kind of did, especially more prominent families did to children who were not quite all there. They say she was mentally retarded, and then she got a lobotomy, and then they kind of hid her away in a hospital for a long time. Maybe it's my soft modern heart, but I had to make that a little bit more justified. As sick as it is to say that there's any justification for essentially lobotomizing and locking away your problem child, I had to give John a little bit more of a reason than that. So spoilers in the book for that. But I mean, most people know the stories of the Kennedys at this point.
Yeah, to be fair, it doesn't. I mean, just a spoiler, it doesn't exactly end well for her, right?
No, no. And the thing is, I wanted to give John discipline, so he doesn't fall into the vices of the Irish people, whether it's adultery or especially alcoholism or fighting or name it, right? There's a lot of stereotypes about the Irish that John is quite aware of, especially in his own father. His children, however, don't have that discipline. So each of them, I give them a vice that is really a thorn in John's side throughout the novel. And unfortunately, just Rosie, she's a woman. She can't hold any public office. The best that John can get from her, as sick as it is to say, is a good marriage to a different family, which he's not particularly interested in. He's John is a real irredeemable bastard in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's sort of an understatement.
Yeah, but
I guess that's why he's so interesting, right? Is that you're sort of, despite the fact that he's an irredeemable bastard, he's not a psychopath, right? He's sort of one of these characters who is, kind of like single-mindedly focused on a goal to the detriment of all else. But I'm sorry, Hudson, I cut you off here.
No, and I think you're right. I did, because I wrote a psychopath in my last book. I tried my best to understand more or less how they think, and I was like, all right, I know where that line is, so let's try and make John somebody that. And the worst part is that he didn't have to be this way. There is a subplot in the book where John buys a baseball team, and his goal is to essentially win by buying up all the best players and making it so that the Major League Baseball can't ignore him and have to kind of integrate his team into the majors. And this comes from the point of view of another character. He only gets 4 chapters devoted in the book, and it breaks up the different decades. But it shows a path that John could have gone down if his priorities were different. If he wanted it more than he wanted, significance or power in the country. I try to give him as many outs as possible, which that's just solid tragedy. Is give the main character as many outs as possible. That way he knows it's his own fault at the end.
That's an interesting attitude. I've never heard that before, but I guess it makes sense. Is that something that you kind of developed on your own, or did you take that idea from someone else?
It was expressed to me. We all kind of know this from why do we why did the Greeks like their tragedies? Well, because the hero has a tragic flaw, and you kind of get this morality tale more or less out of it. That I think that's even Aristotle's Poetics. You can't write tragedy without this central tragic flaw. It was best explained to me by the billionaire Psycho. I don't know if you know him.
No, I'm not familiar.
He's a really good Substack writer. He has that one the Pygmalion article that Geo and the Prudentialist did on their stream a couple weeks back.
Oh, I'd never listen to the Prudentialist. That'd just be awful. No. In all seriousness, so we can move on in the conversation. But you should send me the link to that.
Yes, I will. Yeah, but Billionaire Psycho, he's a really good writer. He's a dear friend, and he helped me develop this book a lot. I owe a lot to him, and you should definitely check out his Substack, which I'll send you the link, and anybody who wants it, I will send that out too. But yeah, that's he kept telling me like, yeah, no, this is great, but where's the out? Where's John gets his comeuppance, but it's not as effective unless he has this, unless it's a choice that he consciously makes to keep going.
And that is a very much an element of especially Greek tragedy, right? Is that the hero has to be kind of damned by their own action, and oftentimes it's sort of a cruel twist of their greatest strength. And I think that that's something that you've latched onto in this. It's really interesting. That at one hand, John's iron discipline is the thing that enables him to, kind of escape the situation that, trapped his parents and that killed his father. But, that same discipline is taken to that level of being a fault, right? Which again is a very Aristotelian idea. And that core defect in him is essentially what, destroys his family and ends up kind of ruining his life.
No, exactly. I couldn't have you put it much better than I did.
Well, Hudson, I think there's probably a reason that you talk or that I talk and you write. We may have different
definitely.
gifts.
I'm usually pretty awful off the cuff. It takes me a while to articulate something half as good as that, let's say.
So yeah, I don't want to. It's hard because I want to discuss this book because obviously I want to give you a chance to show it to people that are interested. I was entertained by it. I thought there was a lot of interesting ideas in it, but I sort of don't want to give it all away. And so obviously we're going to discuss this more. But if people are interested in it, what's a good place for them to find your book?
So it's on Amazon. I believe you linked it in the show notes, and I have it linked on my Twitter as well as my Substack. So, and if you can't find it, then DM me. I will put the link where the sun don't shine. And
I think you've already got some interest because EL in chat says, unfortunately, I cannot read, but I will buy this book and stuff it in a lib's front yard library. Which I think that's a pretty good. Yeah.
Put it just all over the neighborhood.
So I'm curious, just for my own interest, about the process of kind of writing and then publishing your own work. So I know you've said that this was composed in a much shorter time than some of your other books, and that you were kind of more open with this. You gave it to people, you got feedback. But what does it look like when you set out to write? Do you have this idea kind of burning in your head, or was it something that I know you said that you had a short story that you kind of pulled into it, but yeah, what was the process of writing this like?
It started out with the idea. I forget. I was in a group chat with a bunch of other writers, and the idea of the Kennedys came up, and this visceral image of Joe Kennedy giving the sort of next man up speech to Jack after Joe Jr.'s death, and like what kind of man does that? What kind of man, sees past the tragedy of his firstborn son's death for this seemingly kind of not trivial, but less important goal than, something that I value more, which is like, family and stuff like that, or God, or something more than power. Cause I'm not really interested in power myself, which is why I write, and not why I don't, do politics so often. But I just became obsessed with Joseph Kennedy Sr. and the story. I mean, I just rhymed a lot of the beats from the 20th century in terms of how that family kind of goes back and forth. The book really wrote itself, and I just kind of added a few lies here and there.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested because whenever I've talked to talked to writers, they all sort of go about it a different way. So is this something that you would kind of like write when inspiration take you, or did you just sit down and kind of let it come out in large chunks?
I had the basic plot, and I've had this pretty much everything that I write. I have the plot and the ending sort of already planned, and it's about filling in the middle. It's like doing a puzzle that way, uh, which is a really pretentious way of putting that, actually, as I say that out loud. But I usually have all the beats uh, in my head as I prepare to write it, and then I kind of let the characters do their own thing, if that makes any sense. It's hard to explain that. I think George R. R. Martin, for all his faults, he does a good job of explaining how to let characters sort of run the narrative.
What is his method for that, if you don't mind explaining?
So you have to understand them, very deeply, especially the main character, though secondary and tertiary characters, the antagonists, you have to know really well. And it's almost like you're sitting in a room watching them rather than directing them, just based off of what you know about them. It's kind of like watching television or a movie in a lot of ways, and then I write down what I see. So that's takes a special kind of schizo, I guess, to do that, to disassociate so much from their own mind that their thoughts become someone else's thoughts, I guess.
That's interesting, because there's sort of, at least in my mind, two methods I've heard, for writing, which is that you, I guess you identified to Martin, which is that you're sort of more a referee than anything else, kind of focusing the camera, to use a cinematic analogy. And then the other one is what I've heard from Poe, right? And Poe's idea about writing was kind of it was very mechanical. It's like, well, you just sit down and you make yourself write, and there'll be a lot of things you have to go back and change. But his way he describes writing is sort of this, this sort of numbers game, right? Where you just have to kind of produce enough and then cull out anything that isn't kind of, worth it. And obviously, look, like, that doesn't sound particularly appealing to me, but you have to admit that Poe, is at the very least a commercially successful writer, and I happen to
definitely
like his work.
Well, not in his own lifetime, but
later, right? Of course.
But not that I'm a commercially successful writer in my lifetime, but that's neither here nor there. No, that's completely correct. Ray Bradbury is and actually Stephen King, love him or hate him, they're two of the most disciplined writers that I've ever sort of, because I read books about writing, and Ray Bradbury, he wrote like 1,000 words a day or something like that every single day, and he tried to produce one short story a week on top of that, because at the end of the year, there's no way that you have 52 bad short stories. There's got to be one good one in there, and Stephen King, I think he has like something crazy like 10,000 words a day. He's just plugging them, and it's very obvious from, if you ever read one of his books, he's never killed one darling, to borrow the phrase. I think that's Faulkner, but he never, he's a very disciplined writer, though I wish he had an editor that he trusted.
Have you considered going down the L. Ron Hubbard rabbit hole, which is basically just writing so much that you start a cult? Again, I realize there might be ethical issues, but I guess being a cult leader has its pros and cons, and all you have to do is write like 150 shitty sci-fi novels.
Well, unfortunately, my work isn't shitty enough.
That's actually why I brought you on. I think that your book is terrible, and the cult leader route is probably your best bet.
Okay, well, that's gonna really piss off my wife, because she's converted to Christianity and she's taken to that. Like,
yeah, like I said, those are.
Sorry, honey. I know you found God, but I have to be
I've got
God
this cool
now.
ship. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of kind of the disciplined writer, because obviously, the main character in your book has that kind of, intensely focused discipline, because it does sort of seem that there are, and obviously this is an oversimplification, but there being kind of those two creative archetypes, right? This sort of, led entirely by inspiration, right? Like I write when I will, versus the kind of playing a mechanical numbers game. And so I'm curious, going forward, do you have, kind of a timeline for your next work, or are you just going to kind of sit back and recharge? I know that, obviously you mentioned before that you've got some of the plot worked out for a sequel to your first novel, but what are your plans going forward?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm too busy trying to make this one commercially successful at the moment. I have a very interesting short story that I've been playing with for a while. It's a little too base to talk about right now, but yeah, it's a little spicy, but I've had that idea in my head for a while, and I also had a sort of Kennedy assassination story that I've wanted to write for a bit, where it's basically, there's this conspiracy to kill a politician, and 4 of the 5 guys who get brought in by the police, well, it turns out those guys are all federal agents for different agencies, and the 5th guy is kind of like this bumbling idiot who they convinced to do it, but they never expected him to actually be able to pull it off. Fiction.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And obviously, I'm not trying to rush you, but I'll put it this way: I'm interested, if nothing else. So we do have one super chat, and I'll put it this way: it's from Stab Master Ham, and I cannot show you their profile picture on stream. I'll leave it up to the imagination, and it just says Rose Kennedy with half of her brain tied behind her back, just to make it fair. That's an old joke about Rosemary Kennedy, but you paid me $20, so I'll read that.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Ham. If you're the ham I'm thinking of.
So Hudson, we're coming up on time. I'm a little bit pressed because, one, we were late, and 2, I don't have as much time as normal. But thank you so much for coming on. And I know that you mentioned, both the link for your book and then also for your magazine. But where else can people find you if they want to find more of your work?
So you can find me on Twitter at @TR_Hudson, as well as trhudson.substack.com. That's where I have most of my short stories. And if you're interested in either of my books, I put the first chapter of both of them on my Substack for you to read for free. And if you get enticed by that, go ahead and buy it. If not, okay.
Well, again, man, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this talk, and there was a lot that I took from your book. So as far as my links, you guys know where to find me. The show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. For the foreseeable future, the Jay Burden Show will be upping our production to 2 episodes a week. So expect a little bit more than normal. I'll let that go because, as long as it will, and then maybe I'll put it this way. It's not a definite timeline on how long that'll last, at least the next 4 or 5 weeks. But so yeah, double the content. So hopefully y'all enjoy that. And if you want to check out our sponsor, AXIOS Fitness is launching a new project. Again, we're continuing to grow. Lots of people are joining. You can use my link to do that. I'll get a little bit of kickback. It's a good way to support the show. And again, JD's a solid guy, and we could always use more guys who are in shape. I'll put it that way. And again, Hudson, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone at home, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.